Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. And as you can see, I'm back on the road again. But I'm not going to a convention. I'm not coming back from a convention. I'm not even going on a hike with my dog. I had some errands to run, and so heading on back home from these errands. And so I thought I'd share with you what I consider is the most important campaign video I've ever made. Because this video is going to go to a much deeper level. And that is the level of what's wrong with this party. What happened to this party? I mean, we all know the party's in bad shape. It's in financial straits, donations are down, there's strife, there's conflict, there's division, there's parties splitting apart, there's parties dissolving, there's debate fundraising gimmicks, there's mocking ridicule of the presidential race, lawsuits. I mean, it's in bad shape. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to diagnose how it got to this point. So by the time you get to the end of this video, and it's going to be a long one, I'll tell you that right off the bat. If you make it to the end, you will know why the party's in this shape. And you will also know how to get our party out of this. I mean, the job is essentially the job that we have with the American people. I mean, our country's in really bad shape, right? I mean, out of control spending, we've got screws ever tightening on the American people, depriving of our liberty and our privacy. The military's getting us ever closer to nuclear war. You've got debt, $34 trillion, unfunded liabilities, $60 to $80 trillion. This cannot end well, and Democrats and Republicans have an easier time of it, you see, because they just prescribe their Band-Aid. You know, have the Fed tighten interest rates, or tax reform, or raise the debt ceiling. These little Band-Aids that get us through for 6 months or so, but it can't go on forever. This is a bad direction this country's heading in, and so we have to diagnose it. It takes more time and analysis for us to explain to the American people, but it's necessary to do that, and it's just a question of whether the American people want to listen or not. Now, so that's what we have to do in the party, as I've said from the very beginning of this campaign. I announced this back in February of 2023, last year. Our job is to lead America to freedom. That's our job in this party. And in order to do that, we have to get our own house in order. And we're not going to lead anybody anywhere if we don't have our own house in order. And so this video is going to be talking about how to get our own house in order, and then we lead America to freedom. So let me begin with the Gary Johnson campaign, 2012. Now Johnson was a two-term governor of New Mexico, very prominent, credible, very reputable, and he was running for president as a Republican. Naturally, he was a Republican, and he was running in the primaries, and he gets to a point where he realizes that he's not going to win the nomination, but he decides to come into the Libertarian Party to seek the party nomination, and he ends up winning the nomination. But what's important to note about this is that when he comes into the party, he does not adopt or embrace the founding principles of the Libertarian Party. Instead, he comes into the party with his Republican principles, which he called his free market Republican principles, libertarianish type things. And that becomes the new libertarianism. Those positions that he is expounding. Now, what are those positions? Well, they're pretty standard free market Republican positions. Reform Social Security. Have some kind of reform plan, opt-out plan, or whatever. But just reform it. Don't dismantle it. Same with Medicare and Medicaid. Come up with health savings accounts. Something to reform the healthcare system. Try to fix the crisis through reform. School vouchers, improve the public school system with choice and competition. Immigration controls, he was an advocate of immigration controls, but fix the broken system, with some kind of reform plan. Regulatory reform, military reform. In fact, one of the interesting things was that Johnson later ran for U.S. Senate some years later in a special election as the LP senatorial candidate. During this debate, I was watching, and he said, the moderator said, "What are you going to do about military installations here in New Mexico? There's a lot of installations here in which the communities depend and so forth." And Johnson said, Oh, well, that's no problem. I'm a senator. My job is to bring home military pork to my state. And he says, I will do that. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, no. Your job is to just get these things dismantled. And the best place to start is with your own state. But so be it. This message becomes the new libertarianism. And for a while, you've got two brands of libertarianism running side by side. You've got the original brand of principal libertarianism, which entails the dismantling of these government programs, not their reform, the socialist programs or interventionist programs, so then you've got the principled brand, you've got the new brand of reform. But over time, the new brand overwhelms the principal brand, the brand of principal libertarianism in which the party was founded. It goes down a memory hole, and it's largely forgotten, and this becomes the prevailing sentiment. Especially, Johnson runs for the nomination again, so there's an 8-year period where Johnson's views, his positions, become the libertarian principles. I'll give you an example of how dominant this became. That 3 years ago, as you all may know, I sought the party nomination unsuccessfully, but in the year before, I was contacting state conventions saying, may I come and give a talk to your convention? And most of them said yeah. So I'd go give a 20-25 minute talk on this principled libertarianism that I'm expounding in this campaign. And I could see the stunned looks on people's faces, just stunned. These are people that had come in through the Johnson campaign, some of them, and in their minds, that was libertarianism. School vouchers, Social Security reform, and income tax reform, or a sales tax to replace the income tax, or a flat tax. And here a guy comes in saying, no, real libertarianism is the dismantling of infringements on freedom. If all you do is reform infringements on freedom, you're not free. You just improved your serfdom. It's like slavery reform. If all you did was reform slavery with fewer lashings and better work conditions, you may have improved the plight of the slaves, but you haven't achieved freedom. Freedom means the dismantling of the structure of slavery. And so they were stunned. They didn't know what to make of this. I could tell from the looks on their faces. And at first I didn't know exactly what was going on, but I figured it out. And I was hitting chords. You could tell I was hitting chords in them because I was talking about freedom, and this is what freedom was. And I think I was making sense. Well, they were totally befuddled. I mean, they didn't know what to make of me and what they were hearing. But that shows you how dominant this new version of libertarianism became. Now let me stop there for a moment and go back to an earlier period, 1990, when I first joined the Libertarian Party. A guy called me, activist who adhered to my brand of principled libertarianism, the original brand, founding brand of the party, and he said to me, I'd like you to join the platform committee. Now, I didn't know much about the LP. I knew about the movement, and I knew about libertarianism, but didn't know much about the party. And I said no. And he says, why? And I said, because it's a political party. You guys are just compromising libertarian principles to get votes, and that doesn't interest me. What interests me is principles. And so he says, have you ever read the party platform? And I said, no. And I don't need to. I already know what the party platform is. It's just a collection of ad hoc views that are designed to get votes. And he says, let me send you the party platform. Would you read it? And I said, yeah, send it on. Well, a few days later, I get this thing in the mail, and I start reading it, and I'm bowled over. I mean, I'm just shocked. This is like a pure libertarian manifesto. Not perfect, but, pretty close to it. It could have been written by Murray Rothbard. Maybe it was. And abolish Social Security, abolish Medicare, open the borders, abolish the CIA, abolish the FBI. And I'm like, wow. So I call this guy up and I said, man, if you'll still have me, it'd be an honor to be on the platform committee. And I didn't ask how many members there were, or how much money they had, or how many votes they'd gotten in the last presidential race. None of that mattered to me. What mattered to me was being part of a political party that adheres to principle. And I didn't care how large it was. This was hot stuff for me, because now my world in the educational foundation business, where I had started the Future of Freedom Foundation, and our mission was to present the principal case for libertarianism. Well, that world was now meshing with my political world. Here's a party of principle, you know. So I get on the platform committee, and he and I are trying to protect the platform from what is obviously a push among party members, certain segment, that was making the argument that we need to delete provisions out of the platform, and we need to water down the platform in order to get votes. And I said, look, we're a political party, and the only way we're going to affect change is if we get elected. And we can't get elected with these radical positions. Americans just won't vote for us. So we need to meet voters halfway. And so it was this notion that, you know, we've got to support school vouchers, and they called it gradualism. We've got to support a 25-year plan for eliminating Social Security. And we'd point out, well, you've got the libertarian non-aggression principle problem. You've got the pledge that we all take not to support the initiation of force. During this period of so-called gradualism, you're violating those principles. Well, that doesn't matter because it's just temporary. Well, for me, it mattered a lot. And I mean, if you've got a principle, you got to adhere to that principle. In fact, I even wrote a multi-part article that you can find online. I think I wrote it in 1996. So this shows you how far back this goes, called Compromise and Concealment, the Road to Defeat. That if we're going to be compromising our principles and concealing our principles, it's going to be a disaster. And sure enough, somewhere along the line, like when I joined, there was provisions to abolish the FBI and the CIA. I mean, clearly, I mean, these are evil agencies. The CIA, I consider the most evil agency in U.S. history. But the argument was that mainstream Americans and Republicans would never buy this, that abolish the CIA, it's necessary for national security. And so if we're going to get votes, we got to delete these provisions. Disaster. So right now, there's no provision calling for the eradication of these two agencies in the platform. So by the time 2012 comes along and Johnson's running, this mindset, this push in the party in the 90s is now coming fully into fruition. And their positions are essentially the same as people that were pushing Johnson, and it all coalesces. It comes together. And so that manifests itself in Johnson's nomination, and then several more years, that becomes the dominant prevailing sentiment. But it doesn't do any good, because Johnson ends up with 1% of the vote. You know, where are those Ron Paul voters? Why didn't they come over? Well, they didn't come over because they didn't want to cross party lines. They're loyal to their party. Maybe they just sat at home, but one thing's for sure, they didn't come over. Now, in Johnson's 2016 race, he ends up with 3%, which is clearly an outlier. Because if you look at all the other presidential races, including Bob Barr's, another Republican, they hover around 0.5% or 1%. And it's not real clear what happened in 2016, but clearly Bill Weld, who's another prominent Republican, you see, Republican governor of Massachusetts, and credible and respectable in the mainstream press and so forth, that he's the variable here. That somehow or another he may be the one that made this the outlier. And he's an interesting phenomenon too, because after that race, the party hierarchy started grooming him to be the nominee for 2020. And they were feeding him with interviews and fundraising drives. They have his name on the fundraising letters, and I mean, he was the fair-haired boy that they were grooming to be the party nominee for 2020. There's no question about it, because he manifested perfectly this new libertarianism that had come in from the Republican Party. Why not? He came in from the Republican Party. Well, then Weld decides to go back through what had been established, a revolving door with the Republican Party, because the principles were essentially the same between Republicans and the Libertarian Party and our candidates. Weld decides to go back, and interestingly enough, his supporters, who were grooming him to be the party nominee, they don't follow him. They wanted him to be president, but they don't follow him. In fact, one of the fascinating phenomena in all this was the Washington Post comes out with an editorial. No, not Washington Post editorial. George Will, a conservative columnist for the Washington Post, he's Mr. Conservative, Mr. Republican, writes an op-ed saying, can this man save conservatism? And he endorses Weld for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Can this man save conservatism? So, as the LP presidential candidate, I'm sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this is what's happened to the Libertarian Party. And there was no pushback or anything because the party hierarchy thought this was wonderful. Yeah, maybe he can save conservatism as part of it being in the LP presidential nominee. But he goes back, and there's a lot of enmity toward him because like he's betrayed the party or something, you know. And all he's done is go back to the Republican Party with his same positions. But it also shows you why Ron Paul voters don't cross party lines over here. They're loyal to their party too, just like the LP members who were supporting Weld. Now, there's two important things to understand about, well, one important thing to understand about this new libertarian message, and that is that there were two targeted audiences for votes. And one was the Republican Party, naturally. Johnson was a Republican, Weld was a Republican. And the whole idea was the Ron Paul voters. The Ron Paul voters are going to come and vote for the LP candidate. Never worked out. But that was clearly the targeted audience, and they were actually, the LP was targeting Republicans also to come into the party, and a lot of them did, and they brought their baggage, which then fortified this message. By this time, the original libertarian brand of principled libertarianism, it's essentially gone. I mean, it's subsumed, overwhelmed by this tsunami. But by targeting Republicans, it doesn't work. But that sentiment still exists to this day. You see it among my opponents. They often bring up, this is the party of Ron Paul. This is the party of Ron Paul. They don't understand that Ron ran as a Republican, and that big surge of votes was Republicans. But they still have this fantasy that Republicans, those Ron Paul voters, are just waiting out there with bated breath to come and vote for the Libertarian Party presidential candidate. And that's why one of the reasons they claim, oh, we support immigration controls and Social Security privatization and reform and Medicare reform and school vouchers, because they're appealing to those Republican Ron Paul voters. And the idea is that the Republicans would never vote for what I stand for, the original libertarian brand, and they're right, okay? But the fact is, they won't vote for them, okay? Because if they would have, our presidential candidate 3 years ago would not have gotten just 1.1%. Should have gotten 20% with all those Ron Paul voters. And if another example, Chase Oliver. Chase was in this race in Georgia for U.S. Senate, ran a masterful campaign, in my opinion, and he was going to be the deciding factor on a runoff. So, fortuitously, because Georgia was going to determine control of the Senate, Chase is the beneficiary of this. And he gets this massive amount of publicity, more than any other libertarian candidate in history. I mean, national television, for at least a month. Chase is all over the news in all parts of the country. Libertarian Party, Chase Oliver. Libertarian Party, Chase Oliver. Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, NBC, Bloomberg, Rolling Stone magazine. Most influential libertarian in America. I mean, Chase, if any libertarian got his message out to the electorate, it's Chase. And what is that message? Well, it's the standard message that has become the standard libertarian message. Social Security reform. Chase made it real clear in the South Carolina debate vociferously. We've got to continue Social Security for the next 25 years, the next generation. Otherwise, people will be dying in the streets. And in the debate with Senator Warnock, he got into a statewide televised debate with the Democrat. The Republican didn't show up. He advocated the reform of the FDA. He opposed expansion of Medicaid, but didn't call for the eradication of Medicaid. Immigration reform. He says the immigration system's broken, but he's got a plan to streamline it and make it work. So it was a standard reform message. And there are few people in this party that can deliver that message better than Chase. But the centerpiece comes in when Chase, in the middle of the debate, says, I will be a better proponent of small government and lower taxes than Herschel Walker, the Republican. So what he's saying is he's clearly targeting Republicans. He's saying, I'll be a better message of this Republican principle of smaller government, lower taxes than Herschel will. Come and vote for me instead. Now, small government is like a smaller Pentagon. Chase favors a 50% reduction in the Pentagon. I say dismantle the entire national security state, including the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, and restore our founding system of a limited government republic. That's not Chase's message. Chase's message is the standard one of reform. And so you got a smaller Pentagon, smaller CIA, smaller DEA, ATF, Homeland Security, Border Patrol. Everything's smaller, but it's still there. And then tax reform. Chase doesn't believe in eliminating the income tax. He wants just tax reform. He wants to go through the IRS code, delete all the inefficient provisions, and leave it at that. And that was the message he was giving out to the Republicans. I will be a better proponent of this because the Republicans favor tax reform too. They favor lower taxes. They favor small government. And so Chase ends up with 2% of the vote. Why? Because Republicans are never going to cross party lines to vote for a libertarian. And Chase proved it because he got this message out to every single voter in Georgia. And so that's how we can learn from his campaign. Same with Mike Termott. Mike Termott ran a first class, from what I can tell, campaign in Georgia, in Florida, 20th Congressional District in Florida just a year and a half ago, where he took his Gold New Deal to the voters. He got into the debates there, got publicity, he got his message out, and at the end of it, less than 1%. Okay, because there's no constituency out there. That's what we learn from these races. If we can't analyze our races and learn from our mistakes, then how do we ever get anywhere? And we can learn from these races that there is no constituency out there to vote for this because the Republicans are going to vote for Republicans when given a choice. And you see this in immigration, where all of my opponents favor immigration controls and immigration reform. Okay? Standard. And they say, oh, well, this will generate votes, Jacob, because immigration controls are popular. Really? Then where are the votes? Because every single right-wing proponent of immigration controls is going to vote Republican. They're going to vote for Trump. They're not going to waste their vote on a libertarian, even though the libertarian has the same free market Republican position. It wouldn't make any sense to waste their vote on the libertarian candidate, especially since the race between Trump and Biden is probably going to be pretty close. Why would anybody vote for a Libertarian Party proponent of immigration controls when they can vote for the real enchilada? Donald Trump. He's the guy that builds the wall. He's the guy that will put the concertina wire. He may even bomb Mexico. Who knows? But that's who they're going to vote for. So that was one group. That is one group that they target with this message. It's never worked. It will never work. The second group is what we might call mainstream Americans. Okay, sort of the middle class, well-to-do middle class, sort of like the people that attend LP conventions. Okay, I mean, I've been attending conventions for 30 years, and I can tell you that. Okay, you get 75 to 100 people, and they're about, I would say, 98% middle class, mostly white Americans, very few blacks, very few Hispanics, and so it's logical to think, well, okay, if we discovered libertarianism, we can go to our neighbors and friends and sell libertarianism to them and convince them to be libertarians. You see this in the debate sometimes. There's one debate moderator that he's got this mindset of reform. I mean, he's classic reform oriented. And he says, how would you convince a soccer school mom to be a libertarian, to vote libertarian? And I was more fascinated by the question than by the answer, because it's like, that's how he perceives the target audience, the soccer school mom, which conjures up an image of mainstream America, middle-class America. Well, it is my contention that mainstream America is never going to vote for libertarian. Okay, now, yes, we were mainstream Americans. We're middle class, most of us in the party. But for some reason, we've kind of discovered libertarianism. My feeling is we were born as libertarians, and it's just a matter of discovering that we're libertarians. But that doesn't mean that our counterparts out there, or our friends and relatives, are on the same wavelength, because they're not. I mean, I have family members that love me dearly, but they will not consider libertarianism at all, because it's a frightening philosophy. it rightly understood, it entails radical change. Even the Republican light message, like "in the Fed," that frightens mainstream Americans. And so it's always been my contention that the soccer school mom is not going to vote Libertarian. And it's the same with seniors. One of the funniest part of this whole campaign was where one of my opponents said, Jacob can't get the votes of seniors with his position of abolishing Social Security. And I'm there, they're smiling because he honestly thinks that seniors are going to vote for Libertarians. That's ridiculous. No senior's ever going to vote for a Libertarian. And, well, unless he happens to be a Libertarian. But that's a very small number of Libertarian seniors. And seniors are, the first time they hear 25-year plan for eliminating Social Security or opt-out plans and all this other stuff from Libertarians, they're out the door. They're back to Democrats and Republicans. And so no, seniors are never going to vote for Libertarian. So my contention is that these targeted people for votes, Republicans, mainstream Americans, and seniors, is a total waste of time. Don't waste your time there. Okay? Now let me move up now to the Reset Convention in Reno. Now I had high hopes for the Reset Convention. The Mises Caucus had endorsed me 3 years ago for the presidential nomination. It was great. I mean, I had people greet me at every convention. I'm Mises Caucus. Let me help you out here and send your packets out and stuff. It was awesome. And they had vetted the process. You had to go through a committee, and they asked you questions. What books have you read by Ludwig von Mises? What principles do you consider important? And I mean, Mises is one of my heroes. I mean, I've advocated Austrian economics ever since I discovered libertarianism in the late 70s, and so it was a big honor to go through this vetting process and get chosen. So when the Reset Convention's coming up in Reno, I'm excited because what they're saying is that we're going to restore the libertarian brand of principled libertarianism. We're going to restore, at least that's the way I construed it, okay? I obviously misconstrued it, but that's the way I read it, that they were going to restore the party as the party of principle, and that they felt that this whole reform thing was not working. That was the way I construed it. So I became a lifetime member. I forget how much, $1,500. I wanted to help the party a little bit. I know that's kind of a drop in the bucket, but I was excited. I said, my gosh, the party's going to restore the brand of principled libertarianism, and this is what I've fought for. And so this is what I ran on 3 years ago. So this was an exciting convention. I went to the convention. I wasn't a speaker. I had no position there, but I wanted to be part of this. This was exciting. So right out of the chute after the convention, I don't know, sometime later, it's announced that they're going to run 2 Republican candidates. They've recruited 2 Republican candidates for State House. The Reset regime, okay, the Reno Reset regime, the new regime, has recruited 2 Republicans to come in and run as libertarians. And I'm sitting there, oh my gosh, what the heck is going on? And so I write an article in Substack saying, what is this all about? And immediately, I mean, I gain the ire of the Reset regime, and one of them writes me, criticizing me and saying the same attack that I've heard before, and that is, you're just trying to prove you're more principled and more libertarian than the rest of us. Now, the reason I laugh about this is that when I've told the story before, but it bears repeating, that when I announced for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination 3 years ago, I didn't qualify in time to be in the South Carolina debate, which was the first debate of the season. And so but I sat in there and watched the debate, and right out of the chute, a question is asked by Matt Welch of Reason Magazine. What do you do about Medicare? And so he went down the line, as they do in these debates, and we got an answer from every one of them, and all of them were reform. Health savings accounts, or reform this way, or reform that way, or reform this way. But everybody keeps Medicare and Medicaid intact, because that's the new libertarianism. So I come back to my house and I write an article and innocently say, I want everybody to know how I would have answered this, because I figure in a presidential race, people have a right to know where you stand. So to me, it was just perfectly logical to say, this is how I would have answered the question had I been in the debate. And this is how I would have answered if I'd been in the debate. So, and I explained, I would have answered repeal Medicare and Medicaid immediately, without hesitation. These are socialist programs. They violate the libertarian non-aggression principle, and they are the cause of the healthcare crisis. That no matter what reform you come up with, it's never going to work, because the root cause of this is this socialism, healthcare socialism. And I showed in this article that we had the finest healthcare system in history, and it was destroyed with Medicare and Medicaid. Prices were low when I was a kid, before Medicare and Medicaid. Doctors handled the poor for free. They felt it was their ethical obligation. Prices, going to the doctor was like going to the grocery store, at least before this inflationary period, where you just pay your bill and that was it. Nobody had major medical insurance. They didn't need it. Medicare and Medicaid are giant socialist programs that placed an enormous demand on the system, and that was the beginning of the end. And that's why healthcare costs started soaring. So if you want to fix the system, you got to get rid of this socialist program. It's like pulling a weed out. If you just trim the weed, it comes back stronger than ever. You got to pull it out by its root. Well, immediately Matt Welch, the moderator of the debate, and Reason Magazine go on the attack against me, because they're big supporters of this new libertarianism, you see, reform-oriented libertarianism. And they say Jacob's just trying to show he's more principled or more libertarian, which I never had done. I mean, all I was doing was saying this is how I would have answered it. But this is how the new libertarianism suppressed the founding brand of the Libertarian Party, is trying to shame those of us that were fighting for the original brand into silence. That I don't want to be considered more principled or more libertarian. I don't want to be pompous and arrogant. I mean, it's a ridiculous attack, but it's a very effective attack against some people that are scared of being labeled, more principled or more libertarianism. I mean, if you take, for example, the libertarian that favors drug laws and opposes immigration controls, is he more libertarian than the opposite? You couldn't even measure it. How do you measure such a thing? It's a silly attack, but its effect is, oh my gosh, I better not advocate principled libertarianism. Well, then at the same time, right after the article comes out, I get a call from one of my principal supporters in a panic. You've got to take that article down immediately. Take it down. You've cost yourself the nomination. And I said, why? And he says, because Libertarian Party members will never vote for a nominee that's calling for the elimination of these programs. It's deeply ingrained in this party. I said, hey man, these are socialist programs. They're the cause of our problem. Well, if libertarians are not going to call for the repeal of socialism, who is? And he says, doesn't matter. What he was referring to, including in himself, was this sense that this was the libertarian message now of libertarian reform, and that I needed to get on the bandwagon if I wanted to win this nomination. And of course I didn't do that. I left the article up there and I continued to making the case for repealing of these socialist programs, because again, that's not only the solution to our healthcare system and to our general society, but it's how we lead America to freedom. You can't be free when you're living under socialism. So if we jump ahead now to where I was calling for the repeal of these socialist programs later on, there's the mindset's the same. Jacob is just trying to show he's more principled, more libertarianism, and this is what this guy from the Reset regime was saying about me when I questioned these recruiting of these Republican party members after the Reset convention in Reno, and he said to me, "We've vetted them. They're libertarians." Well, one of them was like this super MAGA Trumpster. I mean, like an ardent supporter of Trump, but this guy didn't see any problems with that because Trump was libertarian. You see, there's a lot of libertarians, as you recall, that were supporting Trump because he's free market oriented. He's part of this new libertarianism, and other Republicans that they were supporting, and especially the right wingers that have come into the party. It's for them, it's the same, Libertarian, Republican, it's all the same. And so when he vets these people, these two candidates, including the MAGA Trumpster, he's saying, do you favor school vouchers? Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm sure this is what happened. Do you favor immigration controls? Do you favor Social Security privatization? All the standard things of the new libertarianism. And, of course, yes. Well, why wouldn't they? They're Republicans. And so that's what they're recruiting. And the LNC actually funds them with thousands of dollars, which was very unusual from what I'm told, because they don't usually fund state races. Or that they were willing to fund them to the tune of thousands of dollars. I'm not sure whether they ever ran or not. They may not have qualified. But then, shortly after that, I'm invited to an LNC fundraising event in Arlington or Alexandria here in Virginia. And so I decided to go because I'm still kind of excited about the reset. And the featured speaker at this fundraising event, they said there was going to be big donors here. But their featured speaker is this guy named Corey DeAngelis, who's making the case for school vouchers. And I'm saying, what the heck? I mean, school vouchers are just your classic Republican socialist reform scheme, but they become an essential element in the new libertarianism. And so you use the initiation of force, taxation, to take money from one group of people to give it to fund the education of other people's children. And you actually put private schools under government control because they're now on the voucher dole. But the idea is, Jacob, we have to meet voters halfway. This is the way we get votes, and we need to do this. And so the Libertarian Party has come to embrace what is really a violation of our core principle, the Libertarian non-aggression principle. This is taxation. Taxation is force, the initiation of force. Violates our pledge that we all take, And so I'm sitting there saying, wow, this is not what I signed up here for. And then that's followed by a fundraising letter that the party hierarchy sends out and says, we're seeking your donations to promote school vouchers. It's like, oh my gosh. And of course, I didn't donate. I can't donate to things like this that violate what I believe violate our core principle. And they knew this in the party hierarchy, that I'm not going to fund something that I think is wrong, especially for a party that calls itself the party of principle. And then and this notion of getting libertarians elected to school boards to run the school system. The school system's the most massive socialist program at the state level. I mean, it's like comparable to Social Security and Medicare and the whole welfare state. And so the notion is, well, let's get libertarians elected to school boards to run this system, to gain respectability and credibility. And wait a minute now, that's not what libertarianism is all about. Running socialism is not what our philosophy is all about. How do I support something like this? And they knew that I wouldn't support it. In fact, when they came up with this debate fundraising gimmick, they knew right off the bat that I couldn't support what they were doing. And if I can't do it, I'm not going to ask anybody else to do it. Certainly, I could never do that. And then they send out a fundraising letter saying, help us get libertarians to take over school boards. Well, the freedom position is separating school and state. There's no question about it. Getting government entirely out of education and making that case, which is a totally different case from school vouchers. And finally, the targeted audiences that they have, the mainstream Americans of the Republican Party, they're going to vote Republican every time because Republicans favor school vouchers. So why would you waste your vote on a libertarian school voucher proponent when you can vote for a Republican who's got a much better chance of winning over the Democrat? So now, the final question, though, is what about, are we consigned to this 0 to 1%? Because they say Jacob's principles can't garner votes either. And they're right if you target Republicans and mainstream Americans and seniors. They're never going to vote for my principles, the core principles, I should say our principles. Never going to happen, okay? I mean, when I ran for Senate 20 years ago, I knew that I wouldn't get one Republican vote, and I didn't care. I was running against one of the most popular governors in the history of the state, John Warner, chairman of the Armed Services Committee. This was right after the 9/11 attacks. I wasn't going to get one Republican vote. I didn't care. I don't target Republicans. And then Democrats, they didn't run somebody, but I knew they wouldn't vote for me as a protest because I'm calling for the repeal of their favorite government programs, Social Security, Medicare, public schooling, open borders. They weren't going to vote for me. To the extent they voted for the LaRouche in the race. Nonetheless, I garnered 7% of the statewide vote. 7%. This is 20 years ago. Because I ran a guerrilla campaign that didn't target Democrats or Republicans or mainstream Americans. I found the Hispanic areas of town, and I went in there and talked to them in Spanish and passed out campaign cards in Spanish. And I said, spread the word. You got a Senate candidate that's going to open the borders, abolish all immigration controls, restrictions of the free movements of people, La Migra and Border Patrol, everything. Spread the word. Relying on word of mouth. And I knew word of mouth would spread. And then I found where blacks were having events, picnics, and concerts. And I started going to those, giving out my campaign card and talking about the most racist government programs in segregation. And that's the drug war. And focusing in on that drug war, how I wanted to end this thing, because every black in America knows that this is a racist government program. Blacks get higher jail sentences, they get stopped more often, they get killed more often by the cops, and all of this revolves around the drug war. I'd venture to say that 80% of blacks know who Michelle Alexander is, and 5% of whites know who Michelle Alexander is. And I believe we should be using a presidential campaign to make 95% of white Americans familiar with Michelle Alexander. When she calls the drug war the new Jim Crow, she's right. It is the new Jim Crow. And we could also talk about occupational licensure, especially in the South. These are ways to keep blacks out of hairdressing and floral arrangements and all these ridiculous occupations that they're putting licensing on. It's just the new Jim Crow. Well, in this campaign I ran for Senate, I went and met with a pastor named John O. Peterson at the Alfred Street Baptist Church in Alexandria. Very prominent man, very distinguished. He got elected to the African American Hall of Fame, and he didn't know me from Adam, and I didn't have any money. I was running a straight guerrilla campaign, but I told him where I stood. I said, Pastor Peterson, what we're doing with border 100 years, it just violates God's second greatest commandment. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And I talked about the welfare state, including Social Security and Medicare, and how it puts people in this mindset of dependency. And I talked about the drug war and conscripting blacks to go to Vietnam, to fight and die for freedom, to come back to a segregated society. So at the end of this conversation, he says, Mr. Hornberger, I'm going to endorse your candidacy. And he knew I couldn't. And he was putting his name behind my candidacy. And he says, I want you to take this letter of endorsement to every black minister in the state. And I did. And I have no doubts that the lion's share of my 7%, 106,000 voters, came from blacks. And so what I'm saying we need to do to get this party back in shape and achieve a major breakout in votes. I mean, I keep saying it, convention after convention, we can break into 10 to 15%. And you know, I can tell there's smirks because there's so much cynicism in the party. There's smirks among my opponents, especially, we're at 0 to 1%. He's going to get 10 to 15%. That's right. I can double what I did 20 years ago, because that constituency that loves this message of principled libertarianism is out there, and I think it's doubled and tripled in size over the last 20 years. That's my contention. But not only do we have to change the message to the original founding brand of principled libertarianism, we need to change the target audiences. Forget Republicans, forget mainstream Americans, forget Democrats. Audience one, migrant families. There are millions of migrant families, principally Hispanics, that have been adversely affected by the border, the deaths, the suffering, the rapes, the kidnappings, the horror story there. They're just looking for a viable alternative. They're looking for leadership. They don't know that open borders is a viable alternative, but it is. Now, passing out flyers at conventions now, showing 4 books, major books by major authors, including me, calling for open borders to show people this isn't just an esoteric pie-in-the-sky thing. It is the only solution. I've been saying that for 30 years, the only solution to the immigration morass. And I know that there's people that hate the Border Patrol, hate the wall. I mean, I spend half my life on the border. I can tell you there's people that hate the Border Patrol down there. And there's pockets of people across America, in churches across America, that have to be horrified, but they're just looking for a viable alternative. That's a big block of votes, okay? Then, block number 2, blacks. I mean, we go in there and we make the case of the racism behind the drug war and how we're going to end this thing, and the racism behind occupational licensure laws. That is an enormous block of votes. And it's a gold mine for us. And they have to feel sympathy toward immigrants, because when you're suffering tyranny from a government, you can't help but have sympathy for other people that are suffering tyranny, even if the tyranny is different. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal that half of the Hispanics are now going with Trump, almost half, and 20% of blacks are going with Trump. Those can be our voters. Those 2 big block of votes, right there, you're talking about 10 to 15%, even if you just get a small percentage of those voters. You're talking about a large number of votes. And then the third group, 50% of people who don't vote. It gets up to 50% sometimes. And there's a reason they're not voting. Because they know that it doesn't make any difference. Whether you vote for a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to get the same thing. Now, that statement offends the right-wing members of our party, no question about it, because they think the Republican Party is different from the Democrat Party. And that's why this strange symbiotic relationship with the Republican Party and this revolving door that's been established with the Republican Party. But in actuality, when you look at your brand of principled libertarianism that I expound, then there's no difference between a Republican and a Democrat. Okay, there's a difference between how they enforce immigration controls or what they're going to do with Social Security, whether they're going to raise the retirement age or lower the retirement age. But big deal. Those are not substantive differences. It's one party divided into 2 wings. And these people that don't vote are never going to vote for a libertarian reformer. Never going to happen, because they see that reformer as part of the system. Oh, you want to fix the Social Security system? Oh, okay. You want to keep it going for 25 years? Oh, okay. You're part of the system. You want a health savings account? You're part of the system. You're keeping Medicare and Medicaid. Immigration controls, you're going to fix it? Yeah. You're just trying to fix your system that you Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians have put together. They're not going to vote for that kind of message. But you give them a message of principled libertarianism, dismantle the welfare state, dismantle the warfare state, leave a limited government republic with just a basic military force there. Now you're getting the attention of these 50%, where they lift up their eyebrows and they say, "Oh, that's a guy that I can go vote for." That, needless to say, 50% is a huge block of votes. Okay, you add those 3 blocks together, and then the 4th block, target poor people. The people that are being ravaged by inflation. I mean, the price inflation of what's going on at the grocery stores and at the gas pump and used cars and clothing and everything. You know, the middle class can adjust. You know, that's why the middle class will never come with libertarianism, because they think it's too radical, and they can adjust. They can cut out a couple of vacations or whatever to what's going on with these rising prices. The poor, the paycheck to paycheck people, they can't do that. They have no flexibility here. And so what they have to accept, lowering the amount of food that they feed their family, or the lower quality of food, that type of thing, and that's not really a lot of good flexibility. We go in there and make the case for sound money. And I'm not just talking about what's become a trite saying, oh, in the Fed, in the Fed, in the Fed. You know, no, we got to make the case for giving government entirely out of the monetary sphere. Repeal legal tender laws, repeal all government involvement, paper money. Just get government, separate money in the state. Okay? The same thing with separating education in the state, school in the state, healthcare in the state, economy in the state. Make that principled case to our fellow Americans, and I guarantee you, those people that are suffering the ravages of inflation will leap into our camp, leap into it, because we'll be telling them that no more inflation. With sound money, you have no more inflation. They will come into our campaign. Absolutely no doubt. So you put those four audiences together, you're looking at 10 to 15% right there. And so that's what I'm saying, that our job is to lead America to freedom. And that's what I keep saying, convention after convention. And our principles can do that. Our principles are our greatest asset. That we need to go into battle is who we are. We are not Republican lights. We are libertarians. And we go into battle with our principles. Those are our weapons, our principles. And that's how we start breaking it through the vote totals by targeting these four groups of people. Forget Democrats and Republicans and mainstream Americans. We start rising in the polls, and all of a sudden, you got some excitement building. And I mean, that's what this party needs, is some an exciting campaign. And what more exciting than to be running a campaign of principle, of our principles, for the party of principle. But most important, not only can this achieve a major breakout in votes, this is what can lead America to freedom. It's the only thing that can lead America to freedom. Thanks for sticking with me this long. If you have, I'm Jacob Hornberger, Libertarian candidate for president. My campaign website is Jacob for Liberty.